Hi, my name is David Darrow, and I will be going over the West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, and Japanese encephalitis. Starting with West Nile virus, the virus was discovered in 1937 in Uganda. It came to the United States in 1999 to the United States, uh, specifically New York City. That's where we saw the West Nile kind of erupt from. Ever since then, West Nile has basically progressed throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So all three of these diseases, which I'm going to be going over, come from the genus and family Flaviviridae, Flavirus. Um, West Nile virus is a zoonotic disease. Usually this disease goes from mosquito to bird to mosquito to bird, and that's the life cycle of this virus. But humans and specifically horses are accidental hosts, so dead-end hosts that can be afflicted with this West Nile virus. Unfortunately, there is no vaccine available at this time for West Nile virus. It is a leading cause of mosquito-borne disease in the U.S. Good news is that 80% of people who contract West Nile virus are asymptomatic. This means that they are in fact infected with the disease, but they have no symptoms. Now 20% of people will develop symptoms, and this goes into West Nile fever. Now just to reiterate, if someone should contract West Nile virus, you can't. It's not transmittable from human to human. It's only by a mosquito bite can you really get this virus. So moving now on to West Nile fever. This is at 20% that actually develops symptoms. Now it's not full-blown encephalitis yet, but it is West Nile fever. Symptoms for West Nile fever are, of course, a fever, headache, body ache, nausea, vomiting, swollen lymph nodes, and a body rash. Now, we see West Nile fever really affect the elderly more than any other population. Elderly here is defined as 60 years or older, and they are more likely to be severely infected by this disease. Now, out of that 20% that were infected, so 1 in 150 develop encephalitis. Encephalitis is inflammation of the brain, and it can be very severe. So symptoms at this point include a severe headache, high fever, neck stiffness, stupor, disorientation, coma, tremors, convulsions, muscle weakness, and even paralysis. So at this point, if you get to West Nile encephalitis, 10% of people will die from West Nile virus. Now, there are a few ways that you can get West Nile encephalitis or West Nile virus other than a mosquito bite. One of them is organ transplants. So there already have been some cases of West Nile encephalitis because of transplants and blood transfusions. If you look to the right, I included a horse because horses are actually really affected by West Nile encephalitis. If a horse contracts West Nile encephalitis, 34% die from this disease. But there is good news. Horses have a vaccine. Now this vaccine is good for 10 years, and then the horse will get a booster shot. And most vets have this shot ready available. But that horse vaccine does not work on humans. They're still in development to make a West Nile vaccine for humans. So prevention for humans right now really comes down to preventing mosquito bites, utilizing insect repellents such as DEET, which, on a side note, um, if you're buying DEET, don't buy anything over 50%, save your money, because 50% is really the threshold that works the best. Anything over that, they're basically just selling you a more expensive product, and it's not really going to do much better for you. So 50% or below, that's good. And then long sleeves and pants to avoid insect or mosquito bites as much as possible. Also, for a PSA for DEET, if you're going to be applying DEET to a child, you would like spray it on your hands and then rub the solution on them. And be careful not to apply any DEET to an infant's hands, because they always are putting things in their mouth. So and DEET is poisonous. So just letting you know. Now, diagnosis, and this goes for all three of the diseases that I'm going to be discussing today, really comes down to a cerebral spinal fluid test. And what they're looking for is a very virus-specific IgM and IgM antibodies that will really let you know if this person has West Nile virus. It's actually pretty hard to kind of pin down this virus, because it's very low transient numbers in the body when someone's infected with this virus. Now, if you are infected with West Nile virus, the only treatment really is supportive care, IV, things like that. I did include mannitol here because I thought it was interesting, because mannitol is a sugar that we use, but if given intravenously, it can reduce cranial pressure, and that's what encephalitis is. It's a swelling of the brain, and it's be very detrimental. So mannitol can help reduce that. Okay, moving on to St. Louis encephalitis. It was coined St. Louis encephalitis due to the discovery in St. Louis, Missouri in 1933. 1933 is kind of critical here because there was over 1,000 cases of encephalitis in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, this virus really is meant to be from a mosquito to birds, back and forth, back and forth. But humans tend to be a dead-end host in this case, just like in West Nile virus. So as I said, this is a zoonotic disease, and it's transmitted via mosquito bites. This is a very rare disease. Less than 1% of people who are infected with St. Louis encephalitis develop symptoms. So the symptoms for St. Louis encephalitis include fever, headache, malaise, nausea, dizziness, central nervous system infection, stiff neck, confusion, tremors, disorientation, and coma. Now, the elderly population, if they should contract St. Louis encephalitis, it's almost given that they're going to develop encephalitis, the swelling of the brain, which is really unfortunate because it's because there's no vaccine available for this disease. So if you get it, the only option is, or the only treatment is supportive care. If you look to the right, I included this St. Louis encephalitis case by state, just to kind of show you how rare this disease is. So this is from 1964 to 1998. And between that timeline, only 4,478 confirmed cases have been reported. It really is a pretty rare disease. It is out there. And it obviously has the power to really hurt some people, but it's not very prevalent. Also, side note, I chose to teach these three classes because of St. Louis encephalitis, I am from St. Louis. It's my hometown. And go Cardinals. So back to diagnosis. This is the same as West Nile virus. There is a CSF test they have to do, and that detects for the IgM antibodies in that immunoglobulin. Prevention, there's no vaccine for this, so really it comes down to avoiding mosquito bites and perhaps avoiding those endemic locations where the virus really is active. DEET always helps, and obviously long shirts and pants will prevent mosquito bites to an extent. Okay, moving on to Japanese encephalitis. So Japanese encephalitis was discovered in 1871 in Japan. It's a zoonotic disease that's transmitted by mosquito bites. What's different about this disease is that the reservoir is pigs and waterfowl. For West Nile and for St. Louis encephalitis, that was just birds. But this virus includes pigs. Less than 1% are symptomatic in this disease. And what's different about Japanese encephalitis as opposed to the other two is that there are vaccines available. And they've been made available since 2009. To date, there are 4 vaccines for Japanese encephalitis, but only one is approved in the US. So if you are traveling to China, Japan, South Korea, into those countries, you can get the Japanese encephalitis vaccine, and it can be made available to you. They recommend it to people who are going to be there for more than a month and are going to specific endemic locations. If you're just traveling through, let's say Tokyo, Japan, you probably don't need it. Now, for that less than 1% who get this disease and present symptoms, those symptoms include headache, fever, vomiting, neurological symptoms, weakness, movement disorders, and in some cases seizures in children. So if you do contract this disease and develop the symptoms, 20 to 30% will die from encephalitis. What's different about this disease is the lasting effects. It's a little bit rougher on the survivors. So 30 to 50% of survivors continue to have neurological, cognitive, and psychiatric symptoms. This disease is quite prevalent in the China and Japan area. There's 30,000 to 50,000 new cases each year. So yeah, there's 30,000 to 50,000 new cases each year, but that's kind of sad because all that's preventable. There is a vaccine. So there hasn't been too many cases of Japanese encephalitis in the United States. It's still really located in those areas, in the Asian countries. Going to diagnosis, it's the same as the other ones. It's the CSF test. For prevention, utilizing insect repellent, avoiding mosquito bites, wearing long shirt and pants when available, and then obviously if you're in these areas, the vaccine is available for you. So I would usher people, if they're going to be going there for work, might as well get the vaccine. Because moving to my second point, because if you do contract the virus, there's really no treatment available. It's just supportive care, so might as well be safe and get the vaccine. So in conclusion, I just kind of want to go over a few things. With all 3 of these diseases, mostly people will get these virus and they'll be asymptomatic. They won't even know they're infected with these diseases, which is okay because humans can't pass West Nile virus to another human. It just doesn't work that way. It has to be through a mosquito bite. The mosquito really is the vector here, and the pig or the a bird is the reservoir where the virus kind of lives there. So in all three of these things, all three of these diseases, the rare case usually develops encephalitis, but usually that's tied to the elderly and not really the young population. Humans and horses are dead-end hosts for all three of these diseases. So we're accidental hosts, and they're all transmitted by the mosquito bite. Other than the vaccine for the Japanese encephalitis, there's no treatments available for any of these diseases. All right, here are more sources if you'd like to check them out. Thank you very much for listening.